How's it going, everybody? I want to engage with a comment that I received from Father Stephen DeYoung. He is a priest in the Orthodox Church, and it was on Jacob Federecci's channel. Jacob Federecci is a Jewish man, and it had to do with a video that I made in the past, and it created some conflict. So, unfortunately, in order to engage with the substance of Father Stephen DeYoung's comment, I want to first navigate through the conflict that is going on. It ultimately centers around how you answer the question of who Jesus is. It's not new that this question creates conflict because people are going to answer that question differently. But I think even for Christians of different denominations and people who don't believe Jesus is the Messiah, I think if we can navigate through this, we'll learn a lot about the person of Jesus in this video, but also learn about how we can engage with one another online and learn from each other. So, thank you for being with me. Let's get into it. Now, if we go back a few months ago on the channel, I did a video called Jesus the Judean Debate with Kim Iverson, Apostate Prophet and Inspiring Philosophy. Now, Kim Iverson is saying Jesus is not a Jew. And Apostate Prophet and Inspiring Philosophy are basically saying, you're stupid for saying Jesus isn't a Jew. And I thought that was unfortunate. There are people who will say Jesus is not a Jew, and the reason that they do this is they are concerned that we would be reading back into the New Testament a modern understanding of what that word means and then putting it on Jesus in a way that doesn't honor his historical, cultural, and religious context. Now, on the other side, to just say, you're stupid for saying that is unhelpful. I'm somewhere in the middle of this, and I'm pointing to the fact that the New Testament uses the Greek word Judaisers, and then I'm trying to unpack what that word means in the various passages that Apostate Prophet and Inspiring Philosophy bring up. Now, I have been pointing out online that when people say Jesus is a Jew or Jesus isn't a Jew, they need to explain what they mean by that. You can't just throw it out there without context, and so it causes conflict. And for my part, I provoked Jacob Federecci. He said he didn't bother responding to the video because some things are too stupid to nuke from outer space. Don't tempt me. And so I tempted him because I was hoping to get some sort of substantive response from Jacob. Now, what I did receive was essentially more of the same that Kim Iverson got. Now, I'm not taking Kim Iverson's side, but essentially Jacob said I was stupid. He said I was too stupid to know how stupid I was. He said that I was an idolater, that I hated God, that I hated Jesus, and he also called me a pig Jew, which I kind of find hilarious. Now, in the midst of that, unfortunately, I know this is small, but Father Stephen DeYoung commented on Jacob's live stream. I went on to the live stream because I felt like Jacob was mischaracterizing me. It didn't go well, and I'm sure I said things that didn't really make sense. But Father Stephen DeYoung basically piles on to the vitriol that was already directed towards me by Jacob by saying, dude doesn't know what he's talking about. There's a difference between Judaios and Judaismos. I do kind of go into this in the previous video, but I responded with the question of where Jesus is born, of course, pointing to Bethlehem and Judea and the significance of that the New Testament authors will note. And Father Stephen DeYoung, unfortunately, doesn't really answer my question. He moves in to further point out that he disagrees with me. He doesn't really address the question. Now, he does give some substance, and I want to get into the substance of this. I want to hear Father Stephen DeYoung, but there is unfortunately this conflict that sort of prevents me from doing that. I don't want to just avoid the conflict. I want to be able to move through it for the sake of understanding and peace. And you had an opportunity here as a Christian person, as a priest who cares for the souls of people, to extend compassion, understanding, hospitality for someone who may be other than you, someone you may disagree with, and you didn't do that. And that's unfortunate. I think that you do care for the souls of people, and this was a missed opportunity. Now, it may be an insignificant comment in an insignificant little corner of the internet, but that corner has me in it. And unfortunately, this comment comes at me basically reinforcing all of the things that Jacob had already said about me, that essentially that I'm too stupid to engage with him. What I want to do is actually extend compassion and hopefully understanding and hospitality to people that are different from me, and engage with the substance of Father Stephen DeYoung's comment here. And with this, I should note that I have reached out to Father Stephen DeYoung, and I haven't heard a response. I reached out to Father Stephen DeYoung when he first responded to one of my videos with Jacob, where he called me a trans Jew. And so there are emails in your inbox. And again, you know, the invitation is there to have this conversation more in person. So I hope you understand the sort of the need to do it like this. For me, I prefer to take the time to think through some of this, and maybe this is just like a awkward long chain phone conversation. But what's great is we have other people that are also invited into this conversation who will provide substance that we can learn from. So in fact, like in some ways, this might be a better way to do this, but check your inbox. The invitation is always out there, Father Stephen DeYoung, if you want to clarify anything with me. And so thank you all for being here and participating as well. Again, feel free to share a comment and add your substance to this conversation. I do hope that it is a conversation we can move on past conflict and look at some of what Father Stephen DeYoung is saying. There is a difference between Judaeus and Judaismos. And this is a little bit of, it's a little hard to follow maybe what he's saying here, but I think I have it. The Romans didn't have birthright, providence, or citizenship. He calls me dude. I don't know about that. I don't know how I feel about that. But again, not really addressing the question, which is about, I'm leaning towards the idea that Jesus is born in Bethlehem of Judea, which seems a very important point for the gospel writers, particularly Matthew and Luke, and I don't want to overlook that. We will get to this point again later on, but he doesn't really engage with the question, which is a clue to me that there's something else going on here. If you don't understand the politics of Judea, Galilee, Samaria in the first century, you won't understand St. John presents the Judeans as the party opposing him. I do address this actually in the video. I think it's very important to understand Jesus' ministry in the northern region and his ministry in the southern region, as I think it is leading to the prophecy in Ezekiel 37. I pointed this out in the video, and people are going to disagree with this, but Jesus' ministry fulfills the fact that God is going to bring the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom together and unite them as one. Again, I go through that in the video. Again, I wish there was a more sense that the people who are disagreeing with me are actually listening to me. So again, is there something else behind this? You don't really want to listen before you pass judgment. We have to move past that, guys. The term Judaeos is used in the New Testament both to describe, and I think this is where we get to some substance, residents of Judea, and describes followers of Judaismos, the nomos of the Judeans. The New Testament uses this word, we translate it Judaism. Jesus is not Judaios in the first sense, meaning he's not a Judean, born in Bethlehem of Judea, seems not significant. He's a Galilean, not a Judean, because he does reside in Galilee. I don't overlook this point. I think that is a very important point. He is Judaeos in the second sense, i.e. a Jew or Jew. I think he's saying Jewish, Jews, Jews, i.e. Jews. He is Judaeos in the second sense. He is Judaeos in the sense that he is Judaismos. He is a follower of Judaism. That is a really important point to clarify. He says you have it exactly backwards. Jesus is a Jew. He's not a Judean. Okay, we can, and again, I'm not a Greek scholar, but I am referencing biblical scholars who are looking at and translating the Greek here. Jesus is a follower of Judaismos, Judaism. I think this is what Father Stephen DeYoung, and if I have this wrong, let me know, is referencing when he says Judaeos in the second sense, a Judean in the second sense. The question about Jesus' birthplace, okay, I address that, is sort of being overlooked. But it is an important thing to, let's not overlook these important points because we have an agenda. The agenda is, because I'm right, you must be wrong. I don't think that's really what you're intending, but of course that's the way it presents itself. If Jesus was a follower of Judaism, why does the New Testament never link Jesus to this word, Judaismos? Paul uses it twice, but the gospel authors never really link Jesus to this. We'll get to the idea of Jesus' religion here in a second, so don't misunderstand me. They just never use the word to reference Jesus. So the Holy Spirit didn't inspire it. Jesus never adopts this word for himself. So again, we want to have a view of Jesus that honors him and how he revealed himself. Why did the religious leaders then reject him? Now, I know there were different sects of religious leaders and different groups and things like that, but if Jesus was a follower of Judaism, why did the religious leaders then reject him? Why did they kill him? Why did they obviously think he represented something other than they were? I think that is an important point. Why then does Paul, who is a follower of Jesus, talk about his former life in Judaism? Again, unless I've completely missed the point, if Jesus is a follower of Judaismos, if Jesus is a follower of Judaism, why then do followers of Jesus think they need to reject Judaism? Galatians 1:13-14. For you have heard of my former manner of life in Judaism, how I used to persecute the church of God, different communities. He's saying that I used to persecute this community. He calls it the church of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it. So I came from one community in Judaism and I was persecuting this other community, the church of God. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries, among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions. Now, there is a point here that I want to say, like, what is being preserved here? Jesus is calling people out of a religion, and certainly Paul makes a clean distinction here, but are there good things being preserved? I think a zeal for God and a heart of true worship is something that is good, and Paul sort of even touches on that a little bit. So the question then becomes, what religion did Jesus follow? I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the idea that Jesus followed any religion, because again, the danger here is that we reduce Jesus down into a man-sized figurine that will fit into our assumptions about him. He is a follower. He is the Son of God. He's the true Israel, the true obedient Son. I don't know that us mere mortals trying to ascribe to him some religion is a good idea. Of course, I say that as a Christian. We have labels for ourselves. But what about Jesus? Jesus says this. He says, therefore, Jesus answered, he was saying them, truly, truly, I say to you, the Son of Man can do nothing himself unless it is something he sees the Father doing. For whether the Father does these things, the Son of Man does in like manner. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all things that he himself is doing. So God is up to something, and Jesus is the obedient Son. The Father will show the Son greater works than these. So what works do we do? So that you will marvel, for just as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, even so the Son of Man gives life to whom he wishes. Jesus talks about his Father's house. He'll say this several times, turning my Father's house into a place of thieves or a den of robbers. He refers to his Father's house. When he's a young boy, he talks about being about my Father's business, my Father's house in that way. He doesn't say that it's the house of Judaism. He doesn't call it that. He's pointing us to something greater than a man-made religion. Now, God gave Israel a unique religion. So a God-given religion, not a man-made religion, but a God-given religion in that sense. The people of God have a deep desire for worship. I just said that. It's possible that this desire is also being manipulated by false religions. And I will address this a little bit more towards the end. I want to talk about one positive outcome here, and one that's potentially a very negative and gets into the realm of conspiracy theories, which I tend to do. So I will bring that up a little bit more later. When we pursue that desire on our own terms, we are susceptible to deception. Now, I want to know what you guys think about this, because I'm going into the realm of just, I'm curious about this. It's not something that, there's not like a scholarly article behind me that I'm writing or something. I'm just reading the Bible. I'm just a guy reading the Bible in a community. But I think this is, again, going back to this idea of true religion. Is it possible that one person with a book can hold the entire church accountable? I think we've seen that in history, as long as you're holding the right book. And so, yes, I'm going to go back to the authority of Scripture. And so I read about Saul. Does Israel really want a king like the other nations? God says no. What you really want is a king like me. You really want me. You really want me, not a king like all the other nations. But I will give you a king like the other nations. And doing that provokes something in their heart. They come to realize, this earthly king situation isn't really for our best interest. And yet God works with this misguided desire that his people have, shows them that their true desire is for himself by letting them have their initial desire. I wonder if that's not what else is going on around here with the law. Again, there's a question mark here. Don't misunderstand me. I'm asking questions. And if you again, before you pass judgment, hear me, listen. That's what we need to do. You don't really want a religion, a sacrificial system like these other pagan religions. What you really want is the true worship of me. Now, I will give you a system because we're inclined to idol worship. We are idol factories. We will wander off. And if we don't know how to worship God, it's not that we worship nothing, it's that we'll worship anything, and God doesn't want that. He wants us to approach him with true worship, which is spirit and truth. And so, does he provide Israel with a religious structure through the law that they can approach him, but ultimately pointing to the heart of the law, not the letter of the law? This is essentially what the New Testament is doing. Do not stop short at the circumcision of the flesh. I want you to understand the circumcision of the heart. And these are some of the bricks that Jacob likes to throw. He likes to say that Christianity is Judaism light, when in fact Judaism is Christianity light. You've stopped at the circumcision of the flesh, when God has wanted you to engage in the circumcision of the heart. Does that mean the law is bad? No. Old wine, new wine. Old wineskins, new wineskin. The law is not bad. It leads you to something. So it is good in that sense that Saul also led Israel to a desire for a king who would be like God. So you don't really want a religion like the pagans. You really want me. Moses gives you a certificate of divorce, Jesus says, because of the hardness of your heart. So again, is this God working with the fallen nature of humanity and still providing them a structure through which they can approach him? God will also say that he does not want delight in the sacrifices. For it also says in Psalm 51 that for you, God, you do not delight in sacrifices, otherwise I would give it. You are not pleased with burnt offerings. The sacrifice of gods are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise. And so the law, again, a tutor leading us to a better law, which isn't really a law, but a person who shows us his obedience to the Father and then invites us in to participate with his obedience to the Father and gives us that. Was the temple about giving God a place to dwell? I do not dwell in places made by human hands, Isaiah 61, Acts 7:48, but giving his people a place to congregate. So it's not really about God needing a temple. It's that God understands his people need a temple. But the temple ultimately, again, as a Christian, points to Christ. Revelation 21, right? In his city, there is no temple. He is the temple. And Jesus even says in Matthew 23:37 that he longs to gather his people, like a hen gathering the chicks, right? So he wants to gather his people for the purpose of love and care and affection. And yet we, because we are idol factories, manipulate and twist and pervert even that which we receive from God. It's like Israel receives the gold from Egypt, right? What do? Oh, there's a golden calf. How did that happen? Well, you made it into that. And worship has a transformative power. You become like that which you worship. So that's why you hear a stiff-necked people, eyes that don't see, ears that don't hear, hearts that have become dull. And when we take what God has given us and we transform it into a religion that fits our own needs, that's the process that happens. And Jesus is calling us out of that. That's what I see when I read the Gospels. Something greater than Solomon, Jonah, and the temple is here, is what Jesus is saying. A true king, a true prophet, and a true temple. He himself is the temple. I've said this before, but I do think there's something to this. Moses stays in Moab. Joshua leads his people into the promised land. The law leads you to the promised land, but can't lead you into the promised land. For that, you need a prophet like Joshua. And of course, Jesus' Hebrew name is Joshua. I don't think that is a mistake. So how does Jesus participate with the religious leaders of his day? Again, he's drawing people out of a false religion and into true worship, just like the prophets have done. And so I hope that that's at least a little bit of a engagement with the idea that Jesus is a follower of the Namas of the Judeans. Jesus follows God. He follows his Father. He looks to the Father and then sees what the Father is doing and lives in obedience to the Father. Anything else would be to reduce Jesus down into something that he did not tell us. He didn't say that about himself. Not that I can find. I can only find two places in the New Testament where Judaismos is being used, and it's when Paul refers to his former life in Judaism. So there's a Christian follower who's following Jesus, and he himself realizes he must abandon Judaism. He has left Moab and is following Joshua into the promised land. Now, I'll get to this. Now we want to look at Jesus as a Galilean. I think that this is actually kind of fascinating once we unpack this a little bit as well. So Father Stephen DeYoung says, Jesus is not a Judios in the first sense, a Judean. He is a Galilean, not a Judean. He's a Judaeus in the second sense, Judaismus. We just looked at this. So I want to look at Galilean. He's not a Judean. He is a Galilean. So again, what does Jesus say about himself? And what do the gospel authors and the authors of the New Testament write about Jesus? Because even with Judaismus, they could have used that word if they wanted to. If they wanted to link Jesus to Judaism, they had opportunities to do that, and they didn't. And that's not a point to be missed. This is John chapter 1. These things took place in Bethany beyond the Jordan. What do you guys think about that? I would love to learn more about this region in particular and why this is significant to John the Baptist, to John. Why does he point this out? Beyond the Jordan. But it locates this passage where Jesus turned and saw some of John's disciples following him and said to them, "What do you seek?" They said to him, "Rabbi," which translates to teacher, "where are you staying?" It's important to note that he doesn't correct them. He receives the name Rabbi. So I do want to acknowledge that Jesus participates within a religious structure. Again, I think he's calling people out of something that has become false and into something that was always meant to lead to himself. And so he does participate with the religious culture of his day. And where are you staying? Okay, back to Galilee. Here he said to them, "Come and you will see." So they came and they saw, but they never actually say where they went. John doesn't tell us. Now, he's in the region of Bethany beyond the Jordan. I don't assume that they went to Galilee from here. I don't assume that they went to Nazareth. Now, I have a note here where Jesus was staying. Sorry, I should have made that bigger. Where Jesus was staying at this point, we don't really know. Nazareth was about 80 miles away. And it says it's late. It's already getting late. And so they just go to a place. And I do think it's important that John doesn't really say, "and they went to this town." It just says they went to where Jesus was and they saw. The Son of Man has no place to rest his head. Luke 9:58. Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." John 18:36, Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. Just as my kingdom is not of this realm." Interestingly, again, we're using the word Judean here, the word Judaios, I should say, which can be translated Jew or Judean. Judaios. Now, to Father Stephen DeYoung's point, he points out that St. John presents the Judeans as the party opposing him, opposing Jesus. So not comfortable saying that the party that was opposing Jesus was the Jews. So in that sense, we prefer the word Judean. And I think actually Philip Eisler points this out. The criticism of anyone saying, if you say Jesus is not a Jew, which again, I'm not actually saying that. I'm saying, what do you mean by that, Kim Iverson? What do you mean by that, other people who might be saying this? Because the New Testament word is Judaios, and that carries a significant meaning. I'll try to remind myself. I'm going to get to this Eisler quote here in a second. But for anyone who's saying Jesus is not a Jew, you have to be very careful as well that you don't dislocate Jesus from the historical, cultural, religious setting of his time. So in this sense, it's like, okay, we'll just call them Judeans as though they're like political figures, which they certainly were. but they were religious political figures. And we need to identify people who are stealing religious attention and using it for their own intent, because I think there are a lot of very good people out there who are followers of Judaism. There are very good people out there who are Jews. Jesus found a lot of very good people who he interacted with, who you would call Jews. And so anybody who's saying, Jesus was not a Jew and trying to distance himself from this is risking seeing the dynamic interplay here. And I admit I don't quite see it, but there are people who would be called Jews who followed Jesus. Nicodemus would be one of these, even a very specific reference to a teacher of a law who eventually comes and follows Jesus. Joseph of Arimathea would be another one. But there are other people who are capitalizing on the attention of the Jews, the Jewish religious people who desire true worship of God. And there are other people coming in and saying, oh, this is an opportunity to manipulate that attention for my own gratification and for my own power. And that needs to be addressed. We can't miss that part either. And this actually comes to us from Matthew 23. Then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. Therefore, all that they tell you, do and observe. The words are good. The law that was given was good for a purpose, if we understand its true purpose. Do not do according to their deeds, for they say things and do not do them. Their life doesn't represent the message that they were given to steward. They were given to be shepherds of this, again, the religion that God gave, the instruction that God gave, the structure that God gave his people to bring them together for true worship. They were stewards of that message, and yet their lives don't represent the message. They say things and they do not do them. They tie up heavy burdens and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are unwilling to move them so much as a finger. And that's what I'm talking about. There are people who would want to grab religious attention and religious dedication and twist it and manipulate it for their own gains. And so it's just the term Jew is just too vague and potentially anachronistic to be used without further context, because Jesus interacted with Jews who came and followed him. Jesus interacted with Jews who rejected him and had him killed. So if you just say it like that, it's very confusing. There are Jewish religious leaders who looked at Jesus as a threat to their power that they had. And so what religion were they really following? They weren't following the religion given by God. They were not honoring God. They were following someone else, some other religion, I would say. And how you start to disentangle what's going on in the first century with Jesus and what we see today is also very hard. And so I think we may have more conversations on this channel, or we may start another channel for further conversations, because that itself is very dynamic and nuanced and interesting, and it's wonderful to learn these things. So this is Eisler again. There are biblical scholars having this conversation, so it's not stupid. It's not stupid to ask these questions. There are people looking at the New Testament language. They're asking good questions, and they're having debate and discussion on it. And it's funny, he's going to quote the work of someone else in this book. And essentially that's what we're doing here with podcasts. I'm sort of quoting other people and saying, okay, well, what do you mean? What do you mean by that? But the end goal, I think, is better than either one of us could produce on our own. So he points out that Judias being translated Jew can be anachronistic. He'll just say it is anachronistic, and we're not honoring the first century people who would have been called by that name. He cites Josephus here, and if you can, I'm sorry if it's not super big, but it's on X, and maybe I'll post a quote. Should the fact using Judean as translation of Judaeos mean losing a distinctive way of referring to inhabitants of a geographical region of Judea discourage us for adopting this version generally, as I myself thought in 1998? Meaning, could it refer to someone living in Galilee? That this question should be answered with an emphatic no emerges in a passage in the Judean War where Josephus himself faces this exactly this issue, but is not deterred from using Judaeos more generally. So he describes a group of people going into Jerusalem from all over the place, from many different geographical regions, but Josephus refers to them as Judaeos, which we would translate Judean or Jew. They all have an ethnic identity focused on the temple in Judea, where they happen to live there, whether they happen to live there or not, and whether or not they happen to have ethnic identities derived from other places of residence, a nested identity, which I think is an interesting idea. In the context where it is necessary to refer to both groups, Josephus does not designate the diaspora representatives by some other name, i.e. Galilean. So Josephus could have called them Galileans, or he could have called them by their region, but opts to use the word Judaeos, Judean, to refer to a people who might be from other regions, but their sort of mother region is here where the temple is in Jerusalem and Judea, even if they have a father region outside of that. And so even Eisler points out that essentially someone could be a Galilean and still be referred to as a Judean. And so that takes me to Father Stephen DeYoung's other point, that he's not a Judean. He is just a Galilean, would you say? He's just a Galilean? And I would just say he is certainly more than a Galilean. I think it is important to understand what he's doing in his ministry and why he's moving from region to region, but I've already addressed that. And if we think of Jesus as just a Galilean, if we think of Jesus as just a Judean, if we think of Jesus as anything other than what he called himself, I think we risk running into error. Jesus is fill in the blank. We want to make sure that what we're saying, again, honors him. We can go into, maybe in another podcast, the Son of Man, Son of God, and the references that Jesus uses. But I think the mistake that we would be making is the same mistake that Mark illustrates here in Mark chapter 10. As he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a large crowd, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the road. Sorry, I did this again. He was sitting by the road when he heard that it was Jesus the Nazarene. He began to cry out, "Jesus, son of David." That is not an accident. Mark is telling us that the crowd sees Jesus as the Nazarene. And of course, he's from Nazareth. That's fine. But Bartimaeus' vision of Jesus is elevated to Son of David, and not just Son of David. "Have mercy on me," he cries. "Son of David, who will deliver me." He is the Savior. He's going to rescue me. So Bartimaeus sees Jesus. Though he's blind, he sees Jesus for who he really is. But the crowd refers to Jesus as the Nazarene. And I don't want to make the same mistake. I don't want to say Jesus is just a Nazarene. He's just a Galilean. He's just a Judean. He has come. He is the Word made flesh, and he has dwelt among us. He has made his tent among us. But where does he lay his head? He has no place to lay his head. Can you call him a Nazarene? That's fine. Can you call him a Judean? That's fine. Can you call him a Galilean? That's fine. But do you call him the Son of David? Do you cry out for mercy because you see Jesus for who he truly is? That would be the goal of this podcast right now, is to take our understanding of Jesus and elevate it to a place that is worthy of him and how he pointed to himself. I think Bartimaeus gets it here. I think the crowd doesn't get it. We want to be like Bartimaeus, and we want to acknowledge the crowd, but also understand that they did not have a view of Jesus that was big enough for him. So from here, I have two thoughts that I want to just kind of say, where do we go from here? There's the psyop side of things, there's sort of the black pill side of things, and then there's the encouragement side of things. The psyop and the conspiracy theory is there is a religious system that has seized power from people who actually desire to preserve true worship of the true God. And that system now needs the support of the 2 billion Christians who exist. And this Jesus is a Jew, don't ask any questions, essentially means you're on my side, get in line, or we are going to come after you. Now I'm saying there is some religious egregore behind that motivation. I'm not singling out any one particular religious group when I say that. I'm pointing to something behind that. And so Christians, I think at this point, need to take warning as well. There's a lot in the Christian church that we need to learn, and we are not immune to the idea that though we want true worship, religion comes in and sometimes steals that attention away that should go to God in true worship. Again, our attention is a powerful thing, and maybe in our modern world we don't see that as much. And so we need to be aware of those systems. So though I disagree with Judaism, despite being called a pig Jew and a trans Jew, I have no interest in Judaism. I'm interested in the first century Jewish religious system, and I'm interested in that insofar as it can help me understand the person of Jesus. But I think we can all acknowledge that the Judaism that Jesus interacted with and the Judaism of today are different. And so I am not, my interest in learning about Judaism is not because I want to become a follower of Judaism. I am a follower of Jesus. I don't need to follow Judaism to follow Jesus. And maybe I should have said that at the beginning, because this sort of Judaizer question has really, it's peppered throughout the New Testament. It's not really new that we're dealing with this question. But can we be friends? And I wonder if maybe now at a time like this, even though there's clearly a lot of vitriol between people who disagree with each other, is it possible that maybe having a conversation like this is a tool that we can use to maintain hospitality, compassion, and friendship in the midst of those disagreements? And I'll say this, after Jacob accused me of being an idolater, a person who hates God, a person who hates Jesus, a person who's too stupid to even talk to, I got a phone call. I got a message, not a phone call. I got a message from another friend who is a Jewish man, and he said, "Hey Pete, I just, hope you're doing okay. And I want you to know you're not stupid. I don't think you're stupid. I think you're following truth. I think you seek truth. Don't give up." That's what he said to me. And please understand that this is the greatest compliment I can give you, that in that moment, when other people were not showing me Jesus, you were able to show me Jesus in that moment. And I know you don't see Jesus as the Messiah. I understand that. But that showed me that this is possible. It is possible to have these conversations. And it is possible that we have things to learn from one another. And so I hope that we can continue this. And that's a positive thing. So I sort of took the negative thing and hopefully turned it into the positive thing, because I think the other positive thing that I see is that people are becoming more interested in the person of Jesus. And even people who follow Judaism might be interested in the person of Jesus. And maybe the person of Jesus will be the one who sifts, right? And again, that's not really new. I'm not saying anything that's new here. Jesus will sift those who really want to follow him and those who don't. And things will become more clear as we go forward in time. And that takes me to Luke 21:24. They will fall by the edge of the sword. They will be held captive, led captive to the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. Again, Gentile can also just be translated, sort of ethnos, the nations. And this time of the Gentiles to be fulfilled, is this not similar maybe to Genesis 15:16? Then in the fourth generation, they, the people of God, will return here to the place promised to Abraham. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So in a small way, God uses the promised land to show that he's going to withhold judgment for a period of time. Why? He's God. He's in control. We live in his world. We play by his rules. And then he brings his people into the promised land. Is it possible that we can expand that globally? That there was a period of time where, and the New Testament will talk about this, there will be a time where the nations are actually being gathered by, and I would say by Jesus. And that there's a period of time, and then I think the end will come. And then I think we will rejoice at seeing the Messiah. And I think some people will rejoice because they've seen him for a second time. Some people will rejoice because they see him maybe for the first time. I don't know. We live in a strange world, but I hope that this has encouraged you all. It's not easy. My voice is cracking. The audio hasn't been great. It's swelteringly hot in here today. And yet this has been on my heart. This has been something that I have taken some time to think about. And I hope that we have navigated through conflict together to arrive at truth. I think one of the things that's being exposed is there's something behind the vitriol. It just doesn't make that much sense. I understand people have opinions, but this seems like it is motivated by something behind that. Now, again, we struggle not against flesh and blood and all that. I'm not necessarily looking for demons and spirits behind every bush, but it just seems kind of strange to me. So that's being exposed. The other thing that's being exposed is that there are people who have a true heart for worship, and they have an ability to community build despite ethnic, geographic, and ideological differences that we have. I see that in Jesus. Jesus brings the nations together. The Christians are a diverse group of people, all united, not by our ethnicity, but by our devotion to Christ. And so, thank you for being here with me as I navigate through a difficult topic and a difficult hot day in my room. And so maybe the air conditioner needs to make an appearance here soon. But I appreciate you all. Please, if you got this far, give me a thumbs up, a comment, whatever it is, just to let me know that you are here. I'll catch you in the next one or in a live stream coming up, and I hope you are well until then.